The ledgers in Carew's study smelled of old toner and cigarette smoke that had soaked into the spines 20 years before she was hired to fix them. Odile worked at a folding table near the window, the kind of table that said clearly, "You are temporary here. You do not get the good furniture." A banker's lamp threw a narrow pool of yellow light over the columns she had been cross-referencing since 6 in the morning. Outside, the St. Lawrence was invisible in the February fog. Montreal in winter had a way of erasing itself, and the view from Carew's Westmount estate offered nothing but white sky and the skeletal branches of very old maples. She was not supposed to be here. That was the simplest way she had ever managed to frame it, sitting in the house of the man who ran the port, not by any official authority, but by the kind of authority that doesn't need a title. She was here because Emile, her younger brother, had been stupid. Specifically, Emile had been stupid in the way that only men in their mid-20s with gambling debts and too much access to other people's bank accounts can be. He had skimmed from a receivables account belonging to a logistics company that, on paper, was called Carrefour Maritime Holdings. Off paper it belonged to Carew. Carew had not put Emile in the river. That had surprised her. Instead, he had come to her apartment in NDG on a Thursday evening in September, sat down at her kitchen table without being invited, and explained the situation in the same flat, unhurried tone she suspected he used to discuss cargo manifests. Emile owed a significant sum. Emile was not capable of earning that sum quickly, but she was a forensic auditor. His accounts needed cleaning, 6 months. She would work off the balance in competency rather than cash. Emile would be relocated to work at a legitimate warehouse in Laval and would not make any further creative financial decisions. She had sat across from him and done the math in her head. The math had made sense. That had frightened her more than anything else about the arrangement. His name was Julian Carew. He was 41 years old, tall in a way that filled doorways without trying to, with dark hair that had gone silver at the temples, and a face that had the kind of stillness that came from decades of practice. He had a scar running along the left side of his jaw that she had not asked about. His eyes were the color of the St. Lawrence in November, gray, deep, giving nothing away. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten, at least not in any language she could have transcribed. He simply occupied a room differently than other men, the way a cold front occupies a valley. She had said yes. That had been 5 months ago. You've been at it since dawn. She didn't look up. She had learned, early on, that looking up too quickly gave him some kind of advantage she couldn't fully name. The 9 to 14 filings are a disaster, she said. Whoever was doing your corporate reconciliation before me used a spreadsheet system that was last updated in 2003. I'm surprised you haven't been audited into oblivion. I've been audited twice. He came into the room the way he always did, without announcement, without sound. He stood near the bookcase with his hands in the pockets of his trousers watching her work. Both times the auditors found nothing. That's because the irregularities are embedded in the subsidiary accounts, not the parent ones. It takes someone who knows what to look for. She set down her pen. Give me another 2 weeks on these filings and you'll be cleaner than you've been in a decade. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Emile's balance was settled 6 weeks ago. The words landed differently than she expected. Not loud, just precise, the way a scalpel is precise. She set her pen down on the table. 6 weeks, she said. He's been working in Laval. He's reliable. He stays out of trouble. Carew paused. You've been free to leave since mid-January. I didn't tell you because. He stopped, considered. You didn't ask. She looked at the table. At the columns of numbers she had spent the last 3 weeks organizing with the same careful attention she gave everything she couldn't control in her life, methodically, obsessively, because if the columns were orderly, then at least something was. Why am I still here? She asked. Because you're the most competent person who's walked through that door in 5 years, Carew said. And because my Uncle Gaspard is arriving for dinner on Friday, and I'd like you to be at the table. She turned then slowly. Why? It wasn't a question, really. It was a calculation. "Because Gaspard has a woman picked out for me," he said. He crossed to the window and looked out at the white sky. "The Belforts, out of Quebec City. Old port family. Their daughter is 26, she speaks 4 languages, and her father controls the insurance brokers for half the shipping operations on the lower St. Lawrence. Gaspard considers it an excellent match. And you don't." "I consider it a transaction." He turned back to her. His grey eyes held hers in the way they sometimes did. Not warm, not cold, just very, very present. "I'd like Gaspard to understand my position before he spends the evening presenting it as a foregone conclusion." She understood then. She was a shield, a statement, a comma in a sentence he was still composing. She almost said no. She turned the word over in her mouth and felt its edges. Then she looked at the ledger in front of her and the 6 weeks of freedom she had apparently been sitting inside without knowing it. And she said, "Fine." Gaspard Carew was 73 years old and looked like money that had been left too long in a drawer. Slightly yellowed, slightly stiff, but still legal tender in the circles that mattered. He arrived on Friday evening with his wife, Antoinette, a thin, bird-like woman who wore her jewelry the way some women wear armor, and 2 associates whose function was decorative. The dinner was held in the formal dining room that Odile had avoided for 5 months. It had the kind of furniture that cost more than her car. Gaspard did not stand when they entered. "Julian," he said it with the weight of a man who had been using first names as a power tool for 40 years. His eyes moved to Odile the way a censor moves across a room. Efficient, assessing, unimpressed. "This is the accountant?" "Odile," Carew said. He pulled out a chair for her and waited, without any visible impatience, until she sat. "She's been managing the corporate reconciliation." Antoinette offered a small, brittle smile. Practical. Julian always did have a soft spot for the useful ones. Odile kept her hands in her lap. She had eaten at worse tables than this. She had sat across from men who thought her function in a room was to pour coffee and stay quiet. She knew how to be still. But she didn't know how to be still through the next 20 minutes of conversation, which moved in a slow, predetermined arc toward the Belfort family, the advantages of maritime alliances, the importance of continuity, and the word arrived in the conversation like a stone dropped in still water. Heirs. "You're 41, Gaspard said, pointing his fork at Carew with the ease of a man who had never once in his life been told to put it down. "The operation needs an anchor. Something that outlasts you. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand what you're saying," Carew said. "Claudette Belfort is a sensible girl, her father. I won't be marrying Claudette Belfort." Gaspard's face went through 3 distinct phases in rapid succession. Surprise, then irritation, then the particular shade of red that Odile associated with men who were not accustomed to full sentences being used against them. "You think this is negotiable, Julian?" "I think most things are negotiable," Carew said. "This one isn't." Antoinette set her fork down with a precise click. Her eyes moved to Odile in the way that said, "You." "How very romantic," she said softly. "Though I wonder if the accountant understands what she's walking into. Our world has certain requirements, dear. Certain expectations." She let the pause do the work. "A man in Julian's position needs someone who can grow with the family, in every sense." Odile said nothing. She felt the implication settle into her chest like a cold hand. Carew put down his napkin and stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at Gaspard or Antoinette. He looked at her. "Get your coat," he said. "The soup's gone cold." They rode back to Westmount in silence. The city lights blurred past the car windows, orange and white against the black February sky. Carew sat at the other end of the back seat. She could feel the controlled stillness coming off him the way you feel a cold draft from under a door. Not visible, but undeniable. Inside the house, he went directly to the sitting room. She followed. She didn't want to be alone with what Antoinette's words had put in motion inside her chest. He poured 2 glasses of rye without asking, the kind that came from a bottle with no label that she suspected was worth considerably more than any bottle with one. He held one out. She didn't take it. "You don't have to do this," she said. He looked at her. "Fight them for me," she said. "Gaspard isn't wrong about what you need, a strategic alliance, someone who can give them what they want. I'm a forensic auditor from NDG. I don't belong in that equation." "I don't care about the equation," he said. "You will." The words came out more ragged than she intended. "When you're 50, when you look around and there's no one to carry the name, you'll care, you'll look at me and—" She stopped. She pressed her mouth together, tried to organize the sentence into something that didn't fall apart in her hands. "I need to tell you something, Carew." He set both glasses down on the sideboard and waited. She had rehearsed this. Not for him. She had never planned to tell him, had never planned to be in this position at all, but she had rehearsed it the way you rehearse something you know will eventually have to be said to someone. She had rehearsed it in the hospital 4 years ago in a thin paper gown, listening to the sound of a parking garage through a cracked window while a surgeon told her, in the flat, careful voice of someone who has said this kind of thing before and knows there is no good way to say it, that the infection had progressed too far, that by the time they had gone in, there was nothing left to save. She had been 24 years old. She had sat in that gown and looked at the water stain on the ceiling tile and understood that the future she had assumed was waiting for her. The ordinary, messy, luminous future that she had never thought to question had been taken out of her body while she was unconscious, and no one had asked. "I had a surgery when I was 24, she said. "Uterine infection that progressed faster than they caught it. By the time they operated," she exhaled, "they took everything. I can't have children, Carew. I can't give you a son. I can't give you a daughter. I can't give you whatever your uncle needs the word heirs to mean. I am, as your aunt would put it, not the right equation." She kept her eyes on the floor. She waited. She waited for the shift, the almost imperceptible recalibration she had seen on the face of every man she had told. The moment where the warmth drained out and was replaced by something careful, something managed, something that eventually, in every case, became distance. The fire crackled in the hearth, the clock on the mantel moved, the snow came down against the window in silence. She heard him cross the room. His footsteps were slow and deliberate on the hardwood. She felt his warmth before she saw his hand. Not gentle, not carefully reassuring, but steady and certain, the way he was steady and certain about everything. His fingers curled under her chin, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to look at him. His grey eyes were not cold. They were burning with something she didn't have a clean word for. "Good," he said. The word landed so quietly she wasn't sure she'd heard it right. "What?" "Good." He said it again, and there was nothing ambiguous in it. No hesitation, no performance of acceptance, no attempt to make it sound like something it wasn't. Just the word, flat and final and completely sincere. "Odile, listen to me. I have spent 18 years building something I am not proud of in a city I love. For a family that measures its future in blood and port contracts. Do you think I want to hand that to a child? Do you think I want to look at a 7-year-old and know that by the time he's 15, he'll understand what a legitimate business front is, that someone will one day threaten him to get to me?" He didn't let go of her chin. He didn't step back. "My father ran this operation for 30 years, he said, quieter now. "He died in a chair in a care facility in Laval, and he didn't know my name at the end. Everything he built, the ports, the alliances, the Carew name, it didn't protect him. It ate him. I have no interest in feeding that to the next generation." He paused. "I have considerable interest in building something that ends with me. With us. Just us." She stared at him. "You don't know me," she said. Her voice was unsteady and she hated it. "I know you've been in my house for 5 months and you've never once asked me for anything," he said. "I know you fixed the 2009 filings in 2 days and didn't say a word about it to anyone. I know you made coffee for every person on the security rotation last December and didn't tell me you'd done it. I know that when you think no one's watching, you look at the river." His hand moved to the side of her face, his thumb brushing along her cheekbone. "I'm asking you to stay. Not as collateral, not as a strategy. I'm asking you to stay because this house has been dead for a long time, and you're the first thing in it that isn't." She reached up and caught his wrist. She felt the pulse under her fingers, steady, unhurried like everything else about him. "Are you sure?" she whispered. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not tentative, it was the kind of kiss that said, "I've made my decision, and this is it." The trouble arrived on a Tuesday, wearing a cashmere coat and the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by someone who meant it. Bastien Belfort was 29 and looked like a person who had been told he was charming so many times that he had stopped examining whether it was true. He had dark eyes and the easy posture of inherited wealth, and he arrived at the Westmount estate with 2 men and a message from Gaspard, which amounted to the same thing: come back to the table, or the table comes to you. Carew was at the port. The dock workers' union, historically aligned with the Belfort family's insurance interests, had called a work stoppage that morning. Calculated, deliberate. Gaspard's message delivered in logistics rather than language. Odile was in the second-floor study when she heard the noise at the front door. By the time she reached the landing, Bastien had already made it inside. He looked up at her on the stairs with an expression she recognized. The particular way a certain kind of man looks at a woman he has already decided is not worth taking seriously. "You must be the bookkeeper," he said. "I must be," she said. She came down the stairs at her own pace. "And you're inside a private residence without an invitation, which is interesting." Gaspard thought it would save time. Bastien smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "I came to speak with Julian. We can wait." "You can wait in your car." His smile flattened. He looked around the study she had come out of. Her files, her laptop, the stacks of organized folders that represented 5 months of methodical work. He looked at it all the way someone looks at a hotel room left by a previous guest. Evidence of occupancy, not of belonging. "Gaspard told me about you," Bastien said. "About your situation." He let the pause sit there, deliberate and dirty. "I want you to understand something. You are a phase. Julian will come back to the table. He'll align with the right family and build the right future, and you'll go back to auditing expense receipts in Verdun or wherever it is you came from. That's how this works. You're a dead end, and he'll figure that out soon enough." The words hit exactly where he intended them to. She felt the cold of them spread through her chest. But she also felt something else. The particular clarity that comes when someone uses the wrong weapon against you, and you realize, quietly and without showing it on your face, that you have been holding the answer to this conversation in your hands for 3 days. She crossed to her work table and picked up a folder from the bottom of the stack. The one she had flagged the previous evening and set aside because she hadn't been fully sure what she was seeing. She was sure now. "Your father's company holds the maritime insurance contracts for the Carew subsidiaries," she said. Her voice was level, completely level. "That's been true since 2006. What's also been true since 2006, and what's considerably more interesting, is that the brokerage fees on those contracts have been systematically inflated at a rate of approximately 11% above market value." She opened the folder. "Over 18 years, that represents a significant transfer of funds out of the operating accounts into Gaspard Carew's personal holdings." Bastien stared at her. "Your family didn't know," she said. "It wasn't a question. Gaspard managed the brokerage relationship directly. Your father thought he was receiving market rate. He wasn't. He's been subsidizing Gaspard's private accounts for nearly 2 decades. She set the folder down on the table with a small, clean sound. "The documentation is thorough. Gaspard kept very careful records, actually. I think he assumed no one with the right skill set would ever look." The front door opened. Carew came in from the cold with sleet on the shoulders of his dark coat. He took in the room in one long sweep. Bastien, the 2 men, Odile standing at the table with an open folder in her hands. He looked at her. She held up the folder. "Gaspard has been stealing from both of you," she said. 18 years, I have the documentation." The silence in the room was exceptional. Bastien opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Carew with an expression that was trying to recalibrate faster than his face could manage. "You need to leave," Carew said. His voice was the same temperature as the air coming through the still-open door. "Tell your father his broker has an explanation to make. Tell Gaspard that I have a complete copy of the Carew ledgers from 2006 through to last quarter, and that he has 48 hours to make himself very scarce." He paused. "Your work stoppage at the docks ends today, because you are going to call it off. Because the alternative is your father discovering exactly how much money his operation has lost to a man you both trusted, and that conversation will go considerably worse for your family than it will for mine." He crossed to the door and held it open. The winter air came in, cold and sharp and final. "The roads back to the city are clear. I'd use them now." Bastien left. He was not graceful about it. Gaspard did not go quietly, the way cornered men rarely do. He made calls. He threatened in the language of men who have spent 40 years being the kind of person whose threats are acted upon. He arrived at the estate past midnight, with 3 of his own people, and a handgun that his 73-year-old hands were no longer entirely steady enough to be holding. What followed was brief and ugly, the way the end of things often is. Carew dealt with it the way he dealt with everything, in the language of consequence rather than volume. By 1 in the morning, Gaspard was in the back of a car headed for Pearson Airport with a passport, a bank transfer large enough to make extradition impractical, and the understanding that his return to Quebec would be attended by the release of 18 years of documented financial fraud to every relevant authority in the maritime insurance business. Odile was in the kitchen when Carew came back inside. She had made tea. She didn't know what else to do with her hands. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. The sleet on his coat had melted. There was a cut on his left hand that hadn't been there before. He looked exhausted in a way she had never seen on him. Not the controlled exhaustion of his ordinary manner, but the deep, human exhaustion of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally, irrevocably, set it down. She got up. She went to him. She took his cut hand in both of hers without asking, and his fingers were cold, and she held them. "It's done," he said. "I know. I'm going to sell the port operations," he said, "the legitimate holdings, to a management group I trust. The rest, I'm going to spend the next year making the rest of it disappear as quietly as I can manage. There are lawyers who are very good at this kind of transition." He looked down at their joined hands. "It won't be clean." "I know that too," she said. "You should know what you're staying in," he said. "I'm not going to pretend it's already over." She looked up at him. "Carew, I've spent 5 months auditing the financial history of a criminal enterprise. I have a fairly accurate picture of what I'm staying in." Something moved across his face then, not a smile, exactly, but the precondition of one. The place a smile comes from, if you let it. "I'd like you to stay," he said, "not because of the ledgers, not as a strategy." He stood in the kitchen doorway with the winter cold still in his coat and her hands holding his. "Because I find that I've gotten used to coming home." She stood on her toes and kissed him, tasting cold air and rye, and the particular exhausted relief of a person who has been bracing for an impact that turned out to be smaller than the bracing. The Carew estate in March was a different house than it had been in February. Someone had taken down the heavy blackout drapes in the front rooms and put up something lighter, and the winter sun came through in the mornings and made the rooms look inhabited instead of sealed. The security rotation was smaller, quieter. The cars in the driveway were fewer. Odile's work table was still in the second-floor study, but it was a better table now. A proper partner's desk that Carew had sourced from somewhere and installed without comment one morning while she was on a call. She'd come back to find it there and said nothing about it, and neither had he, which was precisely the kind of communication they had apparently settled into. The language of done things rather than declared intentions. Emile came to visit in late March. He took the train from Laval and arrived looking tentative and better rested than she'd seen him in years. He sat in the kitchen and ate a full meal and looked around the house with the expression of a person trying to reconcile several things at once. "You're okay," he said. "I'm okay," she said. He looked at the second cup of coffee on the counter, already poured, waiting for Carew to come back downstairs. He looked at the kitchen, the open window, the afternoon light on the tile, the evidence of a life that was orderly because it wanted to be, and not because it was afraid. "Okay," Emile said. He let out a slow breath. "Okay." The port deal closed in April. Carew spent 6 weeks on phone calls and in boardrooms. Odile spent 6 weeks cross-referencing every financial relationship that needed to be disclosed, unwound, or properly transferred. They worked late. They ordered food from a Cambodian place on Sherbrooke that Carew had never tried before Odile mentioned it in passing. They argued twice about methodology, and both times the argument ended with her being right about the methodology, and him implementing her approach without further discussion, which amounted to the same thing. By May, the other families had let them go. Without Gaspard to stoke it, the conflict had no fuel. Without the port operations as contested territory, there was nothing worth fighting over. Carew was not a threat anymore. He was, as far as the Montreal underworld was concerned, a very wealthy private citizen who had chosen an early and emphatic retirement. Some found it perplexing. Most found it, ultimately, convenient. On a Sunday morning in late May, they were in the kitchen. The windows were open for the first time, and the smell of the neighbor's lilacs came through on the air. Carew was reading something on his phone. Odile was sitting across from him with her coffee, not reading anything, just sitting in the particular ease of a Sunday that has no agenda. "There's a property for sale in the eastern townships," he said. She looked up. "Farm property, about 40 acres. It has a barn and a view of a lake that I'm told is significant." He set his phone on the counter. "I thought you might want to see it." She put down her cup. "Are we leaving the city?" "I don't know," he said. "We could, or we could stay here." He looked at her with his grey, river-colored eyes. "I find that my interest in what we do next is entirely contingent on where you are when we do it. The geography is negotiable." She looked around the kitchen, the open window, the second cup of coffee, the house that had been a vault and was now, somehow without her fully noticing the exact moment it happened, something else entirely. "Show me the listing," she said. He slid his phone across the counter. She looked at the photographs, the barn, the lake, the long view of the Laurentian hills going blue and soft in the distance. She thought about the things she did not have and had once believed were the whole shape of her future: the children, the noise, the ordinary, irreplaceable chaos of a life built around continuity and the handing on of a name. Gaspard had used her as a verdict. She ends here, she leads nowhere, she is a dead end. He had meant it as the closing of a door. But Carew had looked at that same door and said good, and meant, "I have been looking for a way out of this house for 18 years, and you are it." She wasn't his weakness. She had never been his weakness. She was, it turned out, the only exit either of them had ever been offered from a life built on inheritance and obligation, and the grinding forward motion of a name that had forgotten why it was moving. She turned the phone over in her hands. She looked out the window at the lilacs. "The barn would need work," she said. "Everything worth keeping does," Carew said. She looked at him across the counter, in the ordinary May morning light, in the kitchen of a house that no longer felt like someone else's, and she felt, with a certainty she didn't need to explain or justify or perform for anyone at all, completely and entirely at home.